but essentially I'm a sculptor, so I sculpt the prosthetics or the fake bodies or whatever happens to come through the door. Then I'm on set. I usually go on set and either apply the prosthetics to the actor, go on set when they film, and do any touch-up necessary on set as part of the shoot. Gosh, well, it all began a long time ago, more than 25 years ago, and it was really a hobby. It was very difficult at the time in the sort of mid-80s to find out very much about it, and I was inspired by some magazines. I bought Cine Magic magazine. I found in an old comic shop, and it showed the process, the sculpting and the mould making and how to make a little latex mask. And I thought that looked like fun. So I kind of had to go myself really and found the materials. But because at the time it was such a big thing in America, it wasn't done over here so much. It was really difficult to get hold of any products or anything. So it took me a lot of research. I know a lot of people kind of my age did a similar thing where you went to the library and you kept renewing the same book from the library because you couldn't actually buy it in this country. So we kind of went through that process until eventually I was producing work, and I went to art school. It was a kind of, I hooked on it, the idea of doing it as a career. And I went to art school, and then I did some vocational training in hairdressing and makeup, and essentially I got an apprenticeship at a company called Image Animation in the late 80s. I think the very first thing I worked on was a small indie film called I Bought a Vampire Motorcycle, which was essentially that, about a motorcycle that went round killing people and sucking their blood to fill its fuel tank. So that was very fun, a very funny thing to work on. And then quite a big movie for the time called Nightbreed, which was directed by and written by Clive Barker, who wrote Hellraiser. And Image Animation at the time were quite a big company, and I think we had a big crew on that, about 70 or 80 people working on it, all sorts of weird and wonderful sculpted creatures and monsters for that. And that was really where I sort of came from, coming in and making the tea and making blood, to eventually sculpting some stuff and painting pieces and going on set. So I had my apprenticeship really throughout that movie. I was much more experienced as a sculptor by the time I went to work for Madame Tussauds, and they have a very specific way of working, and the techniques they use there have been invaluable for so many other things I've done since. But they work on a completely different way to the sort of creative prosthetic makeup effects industry, because what they're doing is reproducing real life, and you really need to be absolutely accurate in everything that you do. You know, there's a right and a wrong. It either looks like Leonardo DiCaprio or it doesn't. So that's an extremely difficult, very kind of precise way of sculpting. But the skills that it gives you, the ability to be able to interpret designs. If you're given a picture of a 6-tentacled octopus face creature from sort of one angle, you learn, having worked at Tussauds, you kind of learn how to read that photograph and think, oh, well, that looks like it's behind that, and you can sort of interpret those designs more accurately, I find. Because I got into it from it really being a hobby originally, it's a bit like being paid to do your hobby to some degree. I mean, it's very creative. There's a lot of problem solving. It's great to come up with new techniques and materials. There are so many materials that we use at the moment, and there's always new ways to do things. So for me, some of the technical challenges are great, but really it's the chance to be able to sculpt and paint and kind of create these amazing creatures and illusions, making people look old, that make it really enjoyable. So with the advent of new technologies, HD and CG and everything, we have to be a little more careful for sure about how our work is finished and how clean everything needs to be. I think that often when prosthetics are shot, you can still get away with quite a lot just by good lighting. It doesn't matter if it's super good HD, with stuff like Game of Thrones. There's so much, and actually a lot of the Marvel movies, a lot of the big action blockbuster movies now are so graded in post production that you you don't really, it's worrying. You look at the quality of HD and you think, oh my God, we're going to be able to see every single little brush mark on it. But by the time they finish grading things these days, you don't notice it. I think there are, if you're doing a much more realistic docu-style movie, and you've got maybe some old age and makeups in it, then that's very tricky. But I think a lot of things are still shot on film. I think filmmakers prefer the look of film. I think they just feel that it's got more life to it, it's got more soul. In an ideal world for us and for actors, really, a kind of combination of having real things on set for people to react to, and being able to put like green. I know Barry does it with a lot of the things on Game of Thrones with the whites. They've got green costumes on and green sections missing. So in the post-production, they just remove those areas, and so that you can see through the characters, which is great. That's a fantastic cross-pollination of those techniques, but it's still really good for the actors to have something there to look at, something to react to that is more than a ball on the end of a stick. So hopefully we've still got some years left in us. Yeah. It's always a mixture of being proud of what you've created, and a lot. I mean, he's particularly with the Night King. He's a great character, so everybody's always saying how amazing he looks. It's quite nerve-wracking as well, because it just depends how you deal with the small amount of stress that something is about to come up and they're about to filming and it's getting late in the day, and various things like the smoke doesn't look right and this doesn't look right, and then suddenly he may do something that kind of loosens a piece and you have to go in there and touch it up. So there is a small amount of stress involved just in making sure you're paying attention. And it's very easy when you have a slow day to kind of take your eye off the ball a bit and just think, oh, come on. And you think, oh, they're not doing anything with him. And then suddenly you look at the monitor and they're doing a massive, great close-up, and you have to sort of get in there and make sure you get your moment with him before they start filming. So it's a lot of waiting around, and then lots of really busy periods. But depending on how long the shoot is as well, if you're in for a day, it's great fun to go for a couple of days, and you do something like a throat slash where you're there for a couple of days, you make a mess, you pour blood everywhere, and then you leave. That's great. That's quite a fun thing to do. Sometimes when we were filming on Game of Thrones, we were up in this quarry in Belfast in the rain and the clouds, and for about 3.5, 4 weeks, every day it can get a bit miserable, but at the end of the day, most of us are still really happy to be doing what we do. Sometimes it is interesting to look at other people's work, and it's always interesting to look at other people's work, but you don't want to find that you're drifting or sort of too influenced by somebody whose work you may admire, and you end up kind of half copying what they've done. I think the best stuff is often completely original. I worked on Guardians of the Galaxy years ago with Dave White, and the stuff that he and I think Colin Shaw were designing were brilliant. I mean, that whole sort of theme of stuff was all really quite original, and that was a great project to be involved with because of that kind of completely different makeup look, and that's quite exciting in itself, just to be creating something that looks quite unique. I think the skills you need to do this kind of job, are quite varied. It depends how focused you are on any particular area. So if you really, really want to sculpt, then obviously going to art school or doing any sort of sculptural work is perfect. Sculpture degrees, fine art degrees. If you want to paint, then same thing actually, fine art painting, illustration, anything where you're using colour. So if you want to be on set, then obviously your skill as a makeup artist is one big thing, but a lot of that also is a personality thing, how well you relate to people, how good your interpersonal skills are. So that's a very important part of just actually relating to other actors, because you can just work in a workshop and sculpt and have your headphones on all day and not speak to anyone. So it's a real mix. I think to be able to do everything, it's just you just need to have that balance, have a nice balance of those skills. Yeah, and patience. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's true of sculpting as well. Sometimes you can't quite get where you want to go instantly, and you do have to work at it. And I mean, I think from the way I came into it, from actually having to find out a lot of stuff myself, you become quite dogged and sort of determined to work at something until you get what you want out of it. And that's a useful skill for the industry generally. I think anyone who works in the film industry, you do need to be quite persistent. There are lots of schools now that teach prosthetics and makeup effects, and my advice would be really to look at the syllabus of the schools, see what techniques they teach. There are some really, really good books that are quite cheap. Deborah Netchie's book is good. It just touches on most of the materials, most of the techniques that prosthetics and makeup effects use. It's only a few pounds. A lot of people still come into it by being partly self-taught. But I think it is probably so much faster now to go through a uni, but you have to come out realising that you don't actually, just because you've learnt modern techniques, that's not it. You don't know it all now. There's still plenty to learn, and so much of it is beyond just filling a mould or pouring something. There are lots of other etiquette things at workshops and being on set and just being sociable and all those other sort of aspects there are with any job really. But certainly check out your school and compare it. Don't be afraid to compare it. Don't be afraid to phone up or find out what the teachers have done, because if you're paying to go to a school, then you really want to get as good as education as you can.